In this video, we're going to look at working with an entire character rig and seeing how we go about the business of managing and using the controls to perform different kinds of animation. Rather than go through a long and laborious process of hand keying a motion up from scratch, we're going to instead pick up where we left off in the motion capture retargeting video. If you've not seen that, you should have a watch of it first, in which we go through the steps for getting some motion capture animation off of a source skeleton and onto our T-Rex character here, like this. This has given us a decent enough animation with timing and spacing already set in. Keyframes on all the main rig controllers that we would use during hand animation, and also, if you will recall from the video, it has structured the keys in a certain way, such as position animation only for the top level items like IK nulls and main roots, and keeping rotation on offset items, dividing up what is recorded where. This is a structural technique or approach to how you manage your keyframe data on different control items. Now, the motion capture, quick, clean and easy as it was, does need a fair bit of refinement and manual work to give us some proper T-Rex motion, as the results of just the motion capture by itself are far less than perfect. This gives us the opportunity to see how we can use the puppet-like systems in the different controls, and how we can use the functions and features of the rig for quickly creating detailed character animation that moves in just the ways that we're needing and wanting it to. So for that purpose, you can assume that by this point it's as if we had at the very least just done a quick rough animation by hand. It's as if we just paced the route along nice and smoothly and gone plonk 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 on the foot controllers with some even time spacing just to rough out a quick walk cycle. A little bit of sway on the back and neck. Of course, if we had animated to that point, then what we would have would be sparsely spaced keys. We wouldn't have this dense key data that we've got from the mocap bake. And having that sparse data, often with items having the same key, so things like the foot goal and its offset, both having key frames on the same frame, would help us to retime things very easily. Since this is one of the things that helps us in editing animation, then one of the best things that we can do for motion capture is to try and reduce it. And so when it comes to animating characters, what you have in the mocap workflow, separate from the hand animation workflow, is this desire to try and reduce and quantize your keys somewhat in order to get an animation that's more easily editable. And so that's where we'll start with here. We'll start working and reducing these key curves down to get something that contains all of the nice detail and nuance of the motion capture as best we have it, whilst also giving us back control over the rig parts and the timing, until we reach a set of keyframes which is pretty much similar to what we would get with some good solid hand animation. Here we're going to do a mix, and for that we will be using some of the channel filters in the animation toolbox. One of the things that of course the filters do not like are sudden discontinuous movements, which of course we do have here coming from the base pose. I'm also at this point going to imagine a frame rate change, which of course is something you can do at any point during the whole retargeting and whatnot, though it's more recommended earlier. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to frame 1 and simply key the entire rig, all items, bones, etc. Key them there at frame 1 and then go and delete out any keys before frame 1. Once that's done, we've got a continuous motion going on, and we can start to do some of the more detailed work. I'm going to start that with the curves. Of course, I made a downsample to 24 frames a second, so what I'm going to do is select the entire rig and use Resample to resample the curves now. Set their frames per second to be 24, click OK, and there we go. We get our curves nicely resampled for us like that. We'll apply that resample to keep it. And there we can see our motion's still pretty much the same, nice and smooth, but of course retimed to a new frame rate, which I'm more comfortable at animating here. You may notice, there we go, there's the little snap on the head there. That's not a problem on the neck, it's up here on the head control. We can see that there, it's partway through an Euler problem that it's picked up from the higher frame rate original, and you can see of course that our rebake has put in those in between keys there. What we want to do is grab that selected controller there, go to the Euler filter, and we can consequently sort flips like that out there. So that's grand. I'll continue here doing a little fix on the feet, which I could have done already but missed, which is the fact that, as you can see, they're not contacting the Y0. They've come up a little bit in the retarget. I could just globally move their Y channels down, but instead I'm going to find that area which is taken roughly to be 0, that line there, grab all of these lower side keyframes like that, scale tool, scale them out till 0 hits on 0. Zoom right in close on all of those right around, expect to be at the 0 point, of course those below, and of course I'm just going to force those all to 0. So the hold positions for those feet get reinforced some. Next then, one of the more major steps to be done when you start to get into editing, I'm going to take some of these dense keyed channels and begin reducing them, starting here with the main root's position. The scale of its Y change is quite different from that of its X and Z, so I'm just going to operate on its X and Z here. I'm also going to zoom in quite tight, because although it's fairly smooth over a long period of time, there is a little bit of wiggle in there that you do want to try and maintain. So I'll go to reduce, and we'll start having a go at that at 0.01 there. Okay, that's taking down a fair bit. Try to 0.001. That perhaps is keeping enough of the wiggle and weave in there, so we'll keep that. Next we'll do it just on the Y channel here. Again, try to 0.001. I feel a reduction a bit like that, and of course, okay, can also see that I can grab those keys there and just tweak their tension to flatten that back out, let it cut more similar to its original curve there. Being happy with that, I can click apply. Some places this started to take out a lot of keyframes. This doesn't have to be final, of course. You can come back and run again and you'll just essentially carry on where you left off with reduction. The only thing you lose is the ability to go back. I'll come in, start doing the same on the rotation there for the main root offset next. I find here that although there can be a fair bit of detail, it's also reasonably repetitive and smooth. So as long as you make sure you're not losing any of the great moves, you can see the size of the little jerks and bounces around here. You can get quite a strong reduction of these keys here. And we can see it playing, still nice and smooth, doesn't really look all that different. For the most part, we've just killed off any noise that might have been in there. I'll also perform similar reductions on the other items we've looked at here, such as the back and the neck IK goal, and also the world head item there. The result, not a huge amount of difference because we haven't been overly aggressive in our reduction, but some noise reduction, a bit more smoothness. Very much trying to cancel out the nuances and subtleties of the human motion so that we can more readily turn it into T-Rex motion with its associated nuances and subtleties. The final place I'm going to come in on this first pass of reduction is going to be on the feet here, or on the main leg IK goals, which are of course animated purely on position. Going to treat their Y position differently from their X and Z, and get them with the reduction filter here. You'll see that we can get quite a heavy reduction in those channels there, and very similar results there for the Y channel also. It's then a quick enough job using the flatten holds, and like that you have some heavily edited down keys with nice firm holds in position when the foot is planted on the ground. There you can get some very nice clean auto-flattened curves indeed. The result of which is good solid foot movement with no skate, fixed quickly and easily with just a couple of runs of filters. At this point, while we've got something that's, reasonably well smoothed and flattened in all of those main controls and areas, we're sort of getting to the limit of what we can do for the first pass of smoothing and reduction. And we're really starting to see now the main problem with this, which is of course the actual motion itself. T-Rex unfortunately does not move very convincingly. It looks somewhat like a man in a T-Rex suit, The little run piece here isn't so bad, and that's showing more promise, but the initial walk for certain is very, very poor. And of course this is things like the timing of his walk, where he crosses over his arms and his legs like this as he passes. Look at it, it's rather camp almost, this little turn that he does. And of course it's the action on the feet themselves. Here the toe parts are behaving like human feet, doing this splot and flap, which is completely wrong. During the run the feet are better. They do lift up and pitch down, which starts to look more like we would expect this creature to look. Of course, because human feet in the motion capture are pitching back quite a ways during the run. But that's certainly more workable straight off the bat. First thing we're going to do then is work out these feet and legs somewhat and put some of the life and character into them. So the main culprit for these feet is of course the foot offset controller, or the IK offset controller that we have here, which is of course doing the rotations for the feet in IK. And as you can see, I've had to work on the heading and bank values here and started to reduce those. What I haven't done is the pitch, which is the problem part, and there's little point reducing it because the main problem is the actual animation itself, at least in this first section. So what I'm going to do is grab both of those pitch channels there, grab all of these early set frames and get rid of them or set them to 0, what have you. And that completely removes pitch rotation from our feet there. So clearly still less than ideal, but arguably better than we had before. All we need to do now is work in the actual toe lift. We have on this rig got spline toes that gives us the nice little peel when we work the foot from the IK actual there, and so we'll be able to do most of this animation just on that one controller. As he comes for a step off the ground here, we can start to key it off just slightly before the leg reaches extension. Come back to the frame just after the foot has come to rest there on the ground. At this point, when his foot starts to tilt, we'll have this peeled up, trying to watch the positions of the end toes there. Give him the lift over as he comes through the pass like this, and let him reach and spread there on the come down. We can see already there that that's looking much better for a T-Rex foot pass of this nature. The other control that we'll want then in this instance is going to be the foot lift here, which controls the ankle and the press of the leg in a digitigrade leg like this. And we'll start to work on keys. So we'll look at where our IK actual was, say at 29 here. Let's say at this point 19, where we've got the pass there. We'll have a key for it. We'll go back to an earlier point as well, somewhere perhaps like here 10, and we'll have a key for it. What we'll do here at 10 is we'll start to push the leg out like this. You can also use the Z position to tip it if we're desiring. Here, 19, the pass through, we can start to lift it up a bit, so that pulls his knee forward more. Then when we're coming in for the touchdown, first of all, it's going to make more sense to just speed that up a scotch, so we can grab the main foot goal there. It has a key here on 26, but we're going to delete that and grab the previous key there, or the next key rather, sorry. Move that back, so that's now his touchdown point. We'll also use that as a key for the leg lift here, so we can keep that up. We wait for him to come down into there. 1, 2, 3 after, say, we'll bring it down, as of course the foot takes that weight, and let's say 6 after that, we can just return to normal. And so like that, with just a couple of simple controls, you see that we're able to improve that walk and foot action quite a lot. Of course, you work this as much as you want, as you would with any hand animation, a little bit of, overshoot, follow through to just give it polish and sparkle and so on. We'll then basically just go on to repeat this for this and the other foot through the other, walking keys that we have. Getting this looping and repetition is easy once you've animated it once on one foot. You can just use the graph editor to copy the chunk by selecting the keys, pushing the C key, and then hovering over the graph and pushing the V. Slide the span in time so as it corresponds at the right point. Need more loops, go back and select your 2 or however many that you've got prepared and C and V them in, and so on until you're satisfied and have looped through all the time you need to. It's then very easy to go to the opposing item on the other side, C copy this entire set and V paste them in the other timeline and offset their position in time. That way you get them out of phase with one another. And consequently you can see that with very little work and in next to no time you've got this basic action going on of the toes peeling up and pressing in for every step along this part of the cycle. Now that we've got the feet behaving as the feet should behave, it really starts to reveal other things in the motion that are wrong much more readily. The main thing here is that we can see in the side view he's doing almost this Ministry of Silly Walks. Legs are coming up far too much, and of course the knee going into the rib cage should be a solid clue of that. Maybe he doesn't need to raise so highly, we can play around with that after. But clearly he's carrying his hip in the wrong place. This again is an artifact of the retargeting coming from a human biped onto this creature. The fix here is simple. We're just going to use the root offset item and reposition his hip over his walk. We see of course that when he comes to rest in his stance, his positioning is fine, so we want to key off and keep that. Conveniently we've already got a keyframe there and he looks correct, so we'll key him there. We'll then come back to 1, and obviously because there's no rotation on the root item, it's going to be working across the X and Z, but we can just use the local axis here and push the offset on its local Z and get him more in front of his walk like this. We'll come up somewhere like here, 139, that's the keyframe immediately before our replacement frame, so we'll keep him positioned forwards ever so slightly here as well. We'll flatten that off at this point where now we can possibly come back again a bit, so we'll actually time shift this back slightly to give a smoother transition into the different position. And so we can throw in a little in-between keyframe there as well, and what we're able to do is just watch this whilst playing it back and move this whole offsetting back and forth until we find a position that's more or less correct for it. It always helps to choose a point, the in or the out. I'm looking at the out here and seeing where the foot curls and the leg pulls to extension just as we go into the out step. I figure that this position here is about correct. It still looks a bit unusual. A large part of this comes from what's happening with the feet when it comes in to touch down here. You'll see that it comes over, pulls forward, and there's this slight hang as it comes to drop in. This is again an artifact of the motion capture. In a human walk cycle, we swing our foot forward slightly first and let it come swinging back down to contact the heel. There's this slight overswing in our step. Other creatures don't so much, and we presume neither might T-Rex have, so this is another little conversion cleanup that we'll want to turn our attention to. So I'll grab both the IK goal and the IK actual there, because of course both are animated in this instance, giving the stomp. A quick look at the curves shows us that we've got two going on here. We've got this big dip and small bounce here, which is the IK actual, and we've got this flat tiny dip, which is the IK goal. Really, in part, it's the fault of the animation that we did on the IK actual here. It's interfering with the other. We didn't account for the other when animating it. That, of course, would mean counter-animating with a dip-off curve like this, which would be uglier. The easiest thing to do is probably just to delete out this up keyframe for the IK goal itself. So we get rid of all of that. Aha! And we see that we don't have that same paused stomping going on. That's cleaner. So both the Y positions for both the IK goals there for this whole walk section, we'll just grab them and delete the lot. Zero them out, whichever. And so there we have what now look much better, much more cleaned up feet. You can see that obviously there's tiny little discrepancies from one step to the next. The original motion capture was not rigid in its repetition of motions, although our copy pasting of the values on things like the IK actual and the foot controller null were. So we should go back and tweak the motions there for both of those controls just to tie them in properly for each step. As you go through doing this, you might find that other things from the original bakes now start to work against you, such as the tilt that was coming from the foot lean on the IK offsets for the legs. Again, best thing to do is to find the keyframes in that range and just delete them. We're going to leave the toe and foot roll action completely to the toe system here. With all of that done then, I take a look back over our T-Rex and his motion, and quite frankly I think that those feet are a little over the top. He looks less like a T-Rex doing a walk and not unlike a pony doing dressage. As such, by the magic of video editing, you can see that I've come in and just made some more adjustments on exactly how those feet are moving, how much they lift by. They're not really splotting and dropping down in such a hard way anymore. I haven't done here anything more special than we've already seen. It's really just adjustments to the existing keyframes that we already had in place and a couple of pieces of retiming, as well as coming in some on these group roots and scaling them on their X to provide that toe pinch and flare that we can do this way, just to tidy things up a little bit more like that. And so we can see that we get in the end result there a much more natural action, I think, going on for the feet. And we can continue to refine that, or we can call it done, what have you. But for this point, we'll call it done and we'll start to look at other areas of the rig. And the first one that I'm going to turn my attention to next is going to be the arms, where he's doing, of course, this little strut, strut, strut. Now, in all honesty, given the kind of motion that we've got going on these arms, this very human, swinging back and forth type motion, it's probably an exercise in futility to bother trying to refine the mocap down to something that is more T-Rex-like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the start. Of course, you'll remember that our arms were in IK mode, so we're going to get the IK FK switches there and just plop them straight down to fully FK. We could, if we'd left the rig in a fully editable state, just go into the bodybuilder and edit the control method on the arms to make them fully FK and lose all of the IK stuff altogether. But for these purposes and here, since we're not going to be using the IK at all, or if we've got our rig no longer in an editable state, then we may as well just go ahead and hide away the IK controls like this. That leaves us with these arms doing a very bad FK rotation there, because of course they haven't been rebaked and cleaned from the adjustments that we made on the IK. So all I'm going to do is simply select all of the FK arm and wrist items there, and I'm just going to delete their keyframes completely. And that leaves us with these arms that are now just fixed at their base keyframe point, doing nothing. So we can start animating these nice and simply. Let's just get an initial pose in here then to start with. Get this good classic sort of T-Rex arms pose, something in this fashion. And who knows how T-Rex might have carried his arms. Perhaps he did do it a little bit like people, where the arms go slightly in opposition of the legs. So we'll work that in, but only very faintly. Here we are at frame 1 in the position there with the right leg forward. So we'll scooch along until we are back in that same position there, key them off, come along till we're back with the right leg forward again, key them off, it's again, right leg forward, key them off, and somewhere around there-ish, key them in that same position. Using the animation toolbox then, I'll come in and I'll copy that pose, come over to the opposing side, so there where the left foot comes forward, and I'll just mirror and paste it. You'll notice here that I'm just using the selection item rather than the specific rig items, which of course you can do even though we are working on a Rhiggit rig here. And I'm doing this simply because I know that I want it specifically on those 3 bones of each arm rather than keying off the whole part, and certainly not the whole rig. So we OK that, and there we have the pose mirrored. A little too much over on this side, so we'll just reset it, turn his arm back in there, something like that, and maybe a little tweak the same here. Select again the shoulder, elbow and wrist controllers now that we've got them in that pose. Just copy the pose, come out there, paste it back in, come out to about there, paste it back in, come out to about there, and paste it back in again. Let's take a look at how that plays. And there we see, as he's moving along, there's his arms just bobbing around nice and gently, nothing too major. So we've got this little bit of arm action going on that works as the body's swinging, counteracts the legs. No great or major work involved there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select his arm controls just once again. And a few frames after this, I'm going to pop in a little keyframe as he comes to rest. And I'll put a relaxed pose onto him there. Turn that arm out just a little bit there. Come forward a few more frames and key them again in exactly the same spot. And in the graph editor, I'll just let the natural TCB overshoot on the last frame there do its job. I won't use any kind of hold flattening because I want that just to create a little bobbing action, just a tiny amount that lets them come to rest quite naturally like that. So there we have our T-Rex using his walk cycle. His arms are nice, and there we go. Take a look at him in side view there just to decide what I think. Do I like him? I think that for the most part I do indeed so. He's looking pretty good. The last thing then is just the tail, which so far we have not touched. So I'll come to the top view for that because it's the easiest. And we're going to do a similar thing to that which we just did on the arms here. What I'm going to be watching for here is the lean of the body from side to side and roughly counteracting that. So here we see that the head is pitched over to our right side of the screen somewhat. So I'll just take that first tail control, push it over slightly, and the second one I'm also going to turn a slightly smaller amount. So I'll grab both of those. I'll look for the point where he slinks back to his right hand side again, which is about there. So again, going to need to zoom out just a little bit. There he is, right about there, goes left, goes right about there, and goes left, right again, here-ish, and then of course comes to a stop. So we've got those right keys in, copy that pose, choose mirror, come out to where he slinks to his left, which is around there-ish, paste. We don't need to use the mirror sides here, and we're only bothering about the heading channel for the minute, so okay that. Can uncheck the mirror, copy that pose as it stands, come back out to, there we go, he's hitting his left swing around there. Paste it in his right swing, left swing around here, paste it, and again right, and body pitches leftish about there, paste it. I'm also going to bring it back in here because his swing at this point is starting to diminish as he's slowing down, and we come over to his rest there, pop them ever so slightly the other way, and they'll slowly ease back here. As he's looking to his side, they'll slowly sort of ease out, counteracting of course that head push, rebalancing his body, and of course we sort of hold, starts to swing back again, and so as he comes swinging his upper body and head and neck over, he of course swings his tail back as a counterbalance like this. There we go, we see him in camera view. Looks quite good. Let's watch him from the top, going right the way through, and we see that the swing is quite nice. Perhaps on one of those, just to add in a little bit of variation, this swing here appears a little fast, so I'm going to take that frame and just shove it out a bit, maybe take that one and wind it back just a little bit there. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm also going to make this not quite as extreme, so I'll lessen it off there, and also a touch there. Helps to add a little bit of variation there to our motion. Also going to grab that first null at the end point here where he's really swinging his head quite quickly and just speed that up to give him a little accelerated whip of the tail there. I've just been keying normally, so these animation controls here haven't been used, so I'm of course going to just now convert those all over to TCB spline. We get a nice smooth action, much less choppy on his tail, starting to look very nice. I'll also run a little reduce basic there in order to clear up those 0 keys that of course were added by the fact that I was keying all channels. What I can now do is come in on the side view and add a little bit of pitch adjustment to the tail here, which I'm just going to do on the first tail controller like this. There we go, a little bit of up down action on the pitch for the tail. Again, I'll just set it all off to TCB so it's nice and smooth, and we see it there in camera view 6, and I would say that our animation at this point is starting to get towards complete. Of course, how much additional detail, refinement, you can go on working and working and working, but for the most part I would consider us by this point to be done. Anything more that we could do is really just more of the same, or refining the keys that we've already got, perhaps going in and putting things like the neck or the tail onto Bezier spline control so that we can time the overshoot and the hold of things between these spaced out keyframes and other workings of that kind. So I hope that this walkthrough has been a good guide in showing how we go about animating whole character rigs, whether we're working with motion capture data that we've applied to a rig, as in this case, and of course motion capture data coming from one type of creature, a human, and applied to another, a dinosaur, and how we can still modify and use that to get something working and animated much quicker than we could do by hand. But I hope it also demonstrates how we can use the control systems available in the rigs made by Rhiggit to perform hand animation and get the kinds of nice little detail control over all the various parts, toes, legs, spines, necks, heads, and so on, so that we can create smooth, natural, and of course manageable animation by using the controls and keyframing things in certain ways and structuring our keys on certain parts, as we've seen before, try and get the most efficient workflow that we can when animating our characters.